Good to have you here. This is Omni View, episode 68 for June 2nd, 2026. Multiple perspectives, one briefing. We'll cover what happened, how different viewpoints frame it, so you can decide for yourself. Escalating Russian drone and missile barrages on Ukrainian cities are testing the limits of civilian protection and Western support as casualty counts rise. Moscow launched over 600 drones and 70 missiles overnight, targeting Kyiv and other cities. Officials reported at least 18 deaths, including an 8-year-old boy and a woman in an apartment block strike, with dozens injured and the death toll still climbing. Rescue teams are pulling victims from rubble. Coverage from multiple outlets frames the assault as part of Russia's intensified campaign to overwhelm Ukrainian air defenses. Ukrainian authorities emphasize the deliberate targeting of residential areas, while Russian statements typically describe the strikes as responses to Ukrainian military infrastructure. Western reporting highlights the scale of the drone swarm as evidence of evolving tactics designed to exhaust defensive systems. The strongest case for viewing these strikes as escalatory rests on the documented use of hundreds of drones in a single night against populated districts, which increases risks to non-combatants and strains international humanitarian norms. The strongest case for seeing them as part of ongoing conventional warfare rests on the pattern of reciprocal long-range attacks that both sides have conducted since 2022, with each claiming military justification. Advocates on each side concede that independent verification of every target remains difficult amid active combat. How are casualty figures verified when access to strike sites is restricted, shifting now to developments in the Middle East? President Donald Trump stated he remains optimistic about an interim deal with Iran and is working to ease friction in Lebanon. Iranian officials have threatened to pause negotiations because of Israeli strikes in Lebanon. Reporting presents the effort as an attempt to compartmentalize separate regional conflicts. Some coverage stresses the fragility of talks when linked violence occurs elsewhere, while other accounts focus on the administration's stated goal of reaching an agreement despite those pressures. The strongest case for prioritizing de-escalation in Lebanon rests on the risk that wider fighting could collapse the narrow window for U.S.-Iran discussions. The strongest case for maintaining pressure on multiple fronts rests on the argument that concessions in one theater encourage adversaries to test limits elsewhere. Both approaches acknowledge that outcomes depend on actions by Israel, Iran, and Lebanese actors outside direct U.S. control. What specific steps has the administration taken to address Lebanon tensions? Next, we turn to congressional travel. A Guardian analysis of ethics filings shows that dozens of members of Congress and staff from both parties received trips to Israel funded by the American Israel Education Foundation, an AIPAC affiliate. The trips included meetings with officials, military contractors, and advocates for West Bank annexation. The reporting notes that the travel occurred even as American public support for Israeli policies has declined. Some accounts emphasize the educational purpose claimed by organizers, while others highlight the one-sided briefings described in the filings. The strongest case for such trips rests on the value of direct exposure to the security environment and policy debates for lawmakers responsible for foreign aid decisions. The strongest case for scrutiny rests on the scale of spending and the absence of equivalent programs, presenting alternative perspectives. Both sides note that congressional ethics rules require disclosure of the trips. What disclosure requirements apply to privately funded congressional travel? Meanwhile, voters in several states are heading to the polls. Voters in California and several other states are casting ballots in primaries that include the race for governor. Additional primaries are underway in New Jersey, South Dakota, New Mexico, Iowa, and Montana. Coverage describes the California contest as particularly close. National outlets note that results may offer early signals about party positioning ahead of the next general election cycle. The strongest case for paying close attention to these primaries rests on their role in narrowing candidate fields and shaping fundraising for the general election. The strongest case for viewing them as limited indicators rests on the fact that primary electorates are often smaller and more ideologically motivated than general election voters. Observers on all sides agree that turnout patterns will influence final margins. Which races beyond the governor's contest are on the ballot in California? Shifting to labor action in Britain, members of the Rail, Maritime and Transport Union walked out today after talks with Transport for London failed to resolve a dispute over working hours. A second strike is scheduled for Thursday. Union statements focus on the need for improved schedules, while management has pointed to the impact on commuters during the action. Local coverage notes the timing during rainy weather added to travel difficulties for millions. The strongest case for the union position rests on documented concerns about fatigue and work-life balance in essential public services. The strongest case for management's stance rests on the operational and financial constraints of maintaining frequent service across an aging network. Both parties have indicated willingness to return to negotiations after the current action. What specific changes to the working week are under discussion? Turning to events in East Africa, 2 people were shot dead during demonstrations against a proposed U.S.-funded Ebola treatment facility. The plan has drawn public anger in the area where the center would be located. Local reporting highlights community concerns about safety and foreign involvement in health infrastructure. International coverage notes the protests reflect broader tensions around citing sensitive medical facilities. The strongest case for proceeding with the facility rests on the need for rapid response capacity amid regional outbreak risks. The strongest case for pausing or relocating it rests on the requirement for genuine local consent when establishing quarantine infrastructure. Both sides recognize that trust in health authorities affects cooperation during actual outbreaks. What public health rationale supports placing the facility in Kenya? In Europe, a new migration policy is drawing attention. The European Union has endorsed the creation of offshore return hubs to hold people whose asylum claims are rejected. The policy draws comparisons to earlier proposals in other countries. Supporters describe the hubs as a practical way to manage returns and deter irregular migration. Critics argue the approach raises legal and humanitarian questions about detention outside EU territory. The strongest case for offshore hubs rests on the difficulty of enforcing returns when rejected applicants remain in host countries for extended periods. The strongest case against them rests on the practical challenges of ensuring due process and humane conditions in third countries. Both positions acknowledge that implementation details will determine legal compliance. Which countries have expressed willingness to host such hubs? Before we go, watch for results from the California governor primary and any updates on the scheduled London tube strike on Thursday. That wraps up today's Omni View. Remember, the best informed people read more than one perspective. If this show helps you do that, share it with someone who values fair coverage. See you tomorrow. And before you go, this show is part of the NERA Network, a family of daily podcasts covering tech, science, markets, and more. If you enjoyed today's episode, give Planetarian Daily a listen. Daily breakthroughs in science, health, and longevity. You can explore the whole lineup at neranetwork.com. This episode used AI voice synthesis of my voice. Editorial selection and analysis are my own.